Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and Philip Ingram's still here, and we're joined now by Conservative MP and Shadow Defence Minister Mark Francois. Very good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm going to put the question to you, which I've been putting to our audience and our guests this morning. With Trump and Putin beginning talks, 90-minute phone call, we're going to have negotiations on the future of Ukraine. Russia, though, already being told, well, you can keep captured territory and no way there's going to be NATO membership for Ukraine. Is this a betrayal of Ukraine?
Well, look, I've just come hot foot from the House of Commons chamber to do this interview. We've just had an urgent question, which we, the Conservatives, secured, all about Ukraine. So there was absolute consensus across the House, all parties, that there can be no negotiations about the future of Ukraine without the direct involvement of Ukraine. It wouldn't be right, after everything the Ukrainians have endured, for this all to be negotiated above their heads. There was absolute unanimity in the Commons about that. Where, from our point of view, the Conservative point of view, what we've said on top of that is there mustn't be an outcome that would allow Putin to claim victory. So here's the risk. If they freeze the border where it currently is, then Putin will probably say three things. He'll say, one, well, I've kept the Crimea. Two, I've got most of the Donbass and a lot of the critical minerals there that go with it.
That's the industrial heartland of Ukraine, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And at the moment, he controls most, but not literally all of it. And the third thing he'd say for domestic consumption would be, I stopped Ukraine joining NATO, so I won. All of that sacrifice and all the bloodshed has been worth it. And we cannot allow a situation where Putin in any way can claim victory.
Well, there's no, look, I don't think anyone realistically was thinking if there's any negotiation under Donald Trump that, we helped Ukraine get Crimea back. We didn't do much in 2014. Everyone kind of shrugged. That was the signal, by the way, to Putin that he could probably get away with the next stage of his war on Ukraine. I mean, realistically, I don't know how Ukraine can put up with having part of their territory taken in Donbass. But again, if they haven't got the wherewithal, the funding and the military might from the US and the EU, they haven't got much choice. But we would have a choice of a NATO membership. Now, the Defence Secretary of the United States, Peter Hegseth, has basically said that is not going to happen. That's not an option. But realistically, was that an option when you've got the likes of Turkey, probably Hungary as well, who would actually go, yeah, I don't think so?
Well, look, if you go back to Trump's first term, he famously argued very strongly that all NATO members should spend at least 2% of GDP on defence. Now, when he was making that argument, there were about 5 European NATO members that did. We were one of them, by the way.
Only on a technicality.
No, we did spend the 2%. By the NATO definition, we did, Julia. But now there are about 23, I think. So, Trump has always used this very simple analogy. He's a keen golfer, the world knows. You join a golf club, you pay the membership fee. And on that, I completely agree with him. We'll have to see what kind of figure the Americans are suggesting that we spend. But I think everybody realises that we need to spend more money on defence. We can get into the totals in a moment if you want. But Lord Dannatt, who's a former head of the army, said this morning that it would be madness, or very unwise, to spend £18 billion to hire back the Chagos Islands that we already own, when we should be spending that money on our own defence. So I think any sane person would agree with that.
I was going to bring you on to Chagos, and again, this has massive implications. This decision for whatever Donald Trump and Putin decide for our future defence spending, and I mean, one of the sort of the saner members of the Labour government, I would say, is John Healey, the Defence Secretary. But it's been very, very clear there ain't no money. There isn't going to be any money. And we're in a situation where people are not willing to spend money on defence spending when there's so many other, problems in the healthcare service and infrastructure and things. But the reality is we're going to probably end up spending it at some point in the next 10 years, and it's going to cost us a lot more when we do it in an emergency.
Well, history shows that, the appeasement of dictators doesn't work. And one of the Tory MPs today reminded us of the old Roman quote, civis pacem parabellum. He who desires peace should prepare for war.
Exactly.
As a deterrent. right? A Roman general said that a very long while ago, and he was right. So in that context, it's utter madness. In fact, the Times, in a very powerful leader, described the Chagos deal as their word, insane. I mean, it's a bit like us giving £18 billion to rent back the Falklands from Argentina.
Yeah. No. Don't give them ideas, because that's going to be next on the list. I've got no doubt at all.
I'm sorry, Julie, you warned me about that last time, to be fair.
You've got to stop suggesting these things. But we're told now the Chagos Islands deal, that could be challenged in the courts. I mean, everything gets challenged in the courts, but it shouldn't have to be challenged in the courts, should it? But that's the thing. I do not trust this government to actually protect our national interest, because why on earth, when we know we're entering such a much more we're already in a very dangerous period in terms of the post-Cold War sort of settlement, that's over now. There's no one sensible who knows anything about strategy, the military and geopolitics, who doesn't think we are in a very dangerous time. Why would you give away basically control of, to all intents and purposes, and access for China via Mauritius to a major important strategic military base that the US and the UK rely on?
The government should just drop the whole thing. I mean, there would be a supreme irony if a government which is led by a human rights lawyer, which is obsessed, and I use the word deliberately, obsessed with so-called international human rights, were then to lose on this in court. I mean, there would certainly be an irony in that, but it should never, ever come to that. Look, even in terms of which government department would pay this £18 billion, I tabled some questions recently to the Treasury, and it came back bluntly that even the Treasury don't know who would pay for it.
We know who will pay for it. Us.
Well, ultimately, yes. You know, Mrs. Thatcher once famously said, "There's no such thing as government money. There's only taxpayers' money."
Exactly.
And that remains as true today as when she said it nearly 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
So it really would be. The Times are right. It would be insane, when we should be spending more money on our defence, to give £18 billion to Mauritius to rent back an island that we effectively
and to weaken our defence. It was also extraordinary. Again, this wasn't a binding ruling from an international court. It was sort of a recommendation thing. But also, we now know that one of the judges who made that decision in the international court was a Chinese judge who'd previously backed and defended Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You know, I mean, seriously, we don't need to take these people seriously. We should just ignore it. It is utterly bizarre.
If I may, it's worse than that. There's an important point. Forgive the legalese, but you get the point.
Yeah.
When we signed up to that court in 2017, we had an opt-out. And the opt-out said that no decision of the ICJ that affected either a current or a former Commonwealth country would be legally binding on the United Kingdom. So it's an advisory judgment. Even if it were a final judgment, we wouldn't be legally bound because we have an opt-out when we joined.
Very good point.
So the whole thing is madness, and it's all because the PM and certain people around him are literally obsessed with international law and human rights.
If only they cared about the human rights of people here and the law here, that would be a really good thing. Can I ask you just finally, we've got the latest GDP figures. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, is going to be given commentary. We're basically flatlining. Things ain't looking good. We're not going to be able to pay for any of the stuff that she thinks we're going to be able to pay for by growth, because we're not seeing any. We have, though, seen quite a lot of growth in her CV. It's emerged the latest aspect of her CV that's not quite correct. Big porcupines being told. It seems to me that Hans Christian Andersen's been writing her LinkedIn profile over the years rather than her. We had told you she spent a decade, spent 10 years as an economist at the Bank of England. Then she spent a number of years at Halifax Bank of Scotland as an economist. Then it emerged, well, she hadn't actually been at Halifax Bank of Scotland as an economist. She was in a backroom sort of complaints department role. Question marks about the terms in which she'd left both of these jobs. Had she been, quote, let go rather than chose to leave herself, under what circumstances? Now it emerges, although actually people have been whittling down these 10 years, it's now only 5.5 years that she actually was at the Bank of England as a junior economist. This was the basis on which we were told her as a next Chancellor, the first woman Chancellor, apparently an interesting fact to Labour voters and no one else, that she was qualified to do the job and she would bring expertise and sense to the job. Now it turns out that she can't even bring expertise to her own CV. Should she resign? Should she be sacked for lying on her CV? Because everyone else would be sacked for doing that.
Well, look, I still have some friends I was at school with who are now, down the years, doing, quite senior jobs in the city. And I was speaking to one of them recently. He put it like this. He said, within the city, they're now so tightly regulated by the various regulatory bodies that if one of them, say working for an investment bank, were to be found to have fiddled or embellished their CV, that bank's HR department would have them out of the door in minutes.
Yeah.
You know, it would be seen as, you know, contrary to regulatory procedure.
Yep.
So in the city, to be caught embellishing your CV is effectively, at least in certain roles, a sacking offence, which is why, this was what my friend said, the Chancellor in the city, you know, when people go out in the evening and they have a couple of drinks after work, it's derision. She's a figure of fun. And people no longer take her seriously because of these allegations. So it really would be an idea from her point of view, perhaps to publish a completely updated CV if she wants to retain her credibility in the city, to say, OK, all right, here we are. This is what I really did and didn't do. Do you take my point?
No, I mean, I think she needs to do that, but I'm sorry, everyone else in pretty much any other job would be sacked on the spot, and I don't know why the rules should be different for politicians. In fact, I think they should be even tighter for politicians. Mark Francois, we're going to have to leave it there. Appreciate that you're joining us, Conservative Shadow Defence Minister. Philip Ingram, we talked about the CV issue, unless you want to come back on that, but the Chagos Islands. There's a very good point. Like, we are desperately scrabbling for money to pay for, you know, all of the major public services we need, and people paying sky-high taxes. And then, you know, 18 billion. OK, it's not 18 billion in 1 year, but it's 18 billion quid that we don't have, that we're going to be paying to a country that has no right to Chagos Islands to give away an important defence base, effectively. There's the money. That we could spend that on defence.
Oh, we could do tomorrow. And there's no logic behind why there's so much political push being put behind the Chagos Islands deal this early in this government's tenure. And therefore, when you take all the logical things away, there has to be something illogical or something illegal behind it. And you know, that's what it all points to. And the government is not giving us the truth. So everyone's making their assumptions that there is something underhanded going on here, because that's the only logical
I think we are
logical answer.
rightly assuming that, indeed. 11:40.